Tracy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi,
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, and sorry to kept you waiting.
No worries.
Let me introduce you to the audience and then we can begin. You can share your screen, your video.
Okay.
So our last question is on ESG software of IBM, which is known as Envizi, ENVIZI. So ESG का या environment का जो software है IBM का है, that is called Envizi. और उसमें Tracy is going to first 5-7 minutes speak about carbon footprint. What is carbon footprint? At least मैंने तो सिर्फ नाम सुना हुआ, I don't know what is exactly carbon footprint. So I requested Tracy के जरा सा थोड़ा सा बताए ना 5-7 minutes. तो Tracy मुझे कहने लगा just 5-7 minutes, I can speak 2 hours on that subject. मैंने कहा नहीं, कोई जरूरत नहीं है. 5 to 7 minutes on carbon footprint, then you show the screenshots of the software. Because Tracy, we have already done a session on the awareness of ESG. ESG is a fairly new concept or new awareness in Pakistan. But since I did not request you to talk on the subject ESG, but the software Envizi. So over to you, Tracy.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about carbon footprint, but I put a couple of pictures on my slide of a couple of my favorite things in Karachi, actually. I love riding on top of buses with our local people. And as Shams knows, of course, Karachi is one of my favorite restaurants in the world.
Tracy, let me explain. Tracy was staying here about 7-8 years back in Awari, and he did not get any rickshaw or taxi, so he climbed on the top of a W11, right? And this is his photograph. So this is how well he knows Karachi, and he's very impressed with the Karachi restaurant. And he always says that when I come, please take me to the Karachi restaurant. So he has been coming. He is an ex-IBM, and he has been visiting Karachi a lot, staying in Awari hotel only. Please continue.
Thank you. Yes, it's always interesting to come work with you, Shams. So I wanted to just touch on carbon footprint and what makes that up. A lot of people, I think, when they think of carbon footprint, mainly think about they're riding cars or motorcycles or whatever. But carbon footprint is much more complicated. It has different components like waste, and waste can be cardboard. It could be things like glass, different kinds of metals. It could be chemicals, dangerous chemicals. And then, of course, you have recycling, which, while still in many cases, at least somewhat is waste, it's more efficient. So, and in a lot of countries will recycle paper or metals or glass. Gases, like in manufacturing, things like sulfur dioxide that contribute to air pollution. Other components, fuels like diesel, petrol, not only from vehicles, but like power generators. A lot of times, businesses will have generators that are backup generators in case the power fails. Those that get tested every month or maybe used, and how do you record that? Electricity, of course, is a very common one that is part of the carbon footprint. And how that impacts your carbon footprint can depend on how that electricity is generated. Is it hydroelectric? It may be coal, gas, nuclear, whatever that is. It changes what factors are applied and how much carbon you contribute to the atmosphere. Then other things that people don't think much about, there are offsets. So solar, if I'm generating solar power, that's an offset to my carbon footprint. Reforestation. If we have companies that are out planting trees, that are trying to build forest back that's been decimated, you can get credit against the carbon footprint for that. Doing things to your buildings to make them more energy efficient can generate carbon offsets. And then one other factor is transportation. And it's actually really big, and it's one of the most complicated ones, but that's like the supply chain or value chain, whichever your favorite term is, distribution from warehouses or from like the port in Karachi, where you move something to a warehouse, then from a warehouse, you may move it to multiple stores. Anything like that contributes to the carbon footprint as well. The second part of that is the emissions that are generated and how they're tracked, that they go into the carbon footprint. And there are what's called scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. I don't know if you've talked about this much today, but we'll cover it quickly. Scope 1, the middle one, those are things that are directly generated by the company. Your buildings, your stores, your buildings, your warehouses, company vehicles, these are all things that directly contribute to emissions. They're things that your company is in control of. Indirect are things I bought electricity. I'm using it, but I didn't generate it. But because I'm using it, I'm contributing to the overall emissions. And that gets very complicated, especially with electricity when you have power grids and where that source comes from. Was it generated maybe partially, maybe part of the electric company's power is from a coal plant and part of it's from hydroelectric. So you have to have certain factors and know what those factors are. And it's important with any system too, that it allow you to set your own factors up or to use industry standards. And then there's scope 3, which is very complicated and still evolving. Now, scope 3 are indirect, but they're part of your supply chain. At least part of it is. So I own a retail location. I have a retail location. I purchase something from a manufacturer, and that manufacturer maybe is from another country, and it comes into the port. And then from the port, again, it goes to your warehouse. From your warehouse, you're distributing it to individual stores. How do you account for that carbon emission of that transportation chain? Plus, of course, there's a certain amount of carbon generated when you're manufacturing something, even things like agriculture. So in the United States, for example, some of your bigger companies, like probably, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Walmart as a name. Walmart, for example, tracks produce. They actually track vegetables grown in a field. They know where it came from. That vendor has to supply information on their emissions, but then Walmart can track that from the time it's picked in the field to it goes to a central processing plant where it's cleaned and treated. Then it may be sent to a distribution center, then to a store. Walmart tracks every single one of those steps. And that's a different subject, but they also use blockchain to track that. So if there's ever any kind of outbreak of something like E. coli, they can go back and trace the origin of fruits and vegetables. But anyway, scope 3 again gets into employee commuting, which again is complicated because if you talk about like the Netherlands, a lot of people ride bicycles rather than take public transportation or cars. How do you track all of that? All of that comes into scope 3. So as we talk more about sustainability software and how to track all that, I want to talk a little bit about IBM Envizi. It is a suite of software that really is from a company that IBM bought. And as I go into it, you'll see why it's very interesting. But this is an Australian company originally, and IBM was a customer of theirs because they track their global emissions. They track emissions for everything all over the world. And they were using this system. They thought it was so impressive, they just bought the company. IBM can do those things. Right. Now, a lot of the numbers and figures on here are based on the US, but it's also based on global trends. So one of the things we're seeing is like in the last 10 years, investors, whether that's individual investors or brokerage companies, financial institutions, they're insisting that companies become more sustainable. And we're seeing this, and this happens all over the world. I'm sure in Pakistan, you're seeing that too, where people are, your companies are becoming far more aware and investors are more aware of the carbon footprint and what we do as a people to our planet. So we're also seeing trends again globally. I'm not sure how strong that is in Pakistan, but in the United States, about 80% of people say that sustainability is important to them. And one of the things, I was in Dallas with IBM a couple of months ago, and a couple of the business partners that were there were talking about their college age kids who won't buy anything or order anything online until unless they see a sustainable company logo. Okay, that's very interesting. And you're seeing that more around the world. We're seeing more of a trend where employees are asking those questions. You know, they want to work for organizations that are environmentally responsible and taking care of the planet. And globally, 83% of the population of the world right now has at least some kind of commitments for greenhouse gas reduction. And going along with all of that, of course, is individual companies need to be able to report on those emissions. They've got to do disclosure reporting. And it's not just emissions, by the way, because I'm going to hit a lot on sustainability here, but IBM Envizi is an ESG reporting tool. Heavy focus on sustainability, but it is a reporting tool that covers all of ESG. Envizi's been in the market for 15 years. It has, and these numbers are early in the first quarter of this year. So 810,000 utility accounts. So it is a cloud-based solution, and they actually have 810,000 links into accounts for companies, 247,000 individual locations, a location, you know, being a facility. So if you're a bank, for instance, and you have 1,000 branches, you have 1,000 of those locations, and they're in 175 countries. Envizi is one of the leading providers, if not really the leading provider, according to Verdantix, as of the last publication in 2022 for the Green Quadrant, as they call it. There were 15 software providers evaluated, and then they had a whole list of criteria, things like, can they do all of scope 1, 2, and 3? Do they have good data quality control? And IBM, by the way, got the highest score in that particular area. And that is really important. Envizi has tools in it to help you make sure the data that you're using is accurate. If you don't have good data, it's pointless, right? The fact that you also have financially certifiable, financially auditable results, that's one of the reasons you have to have good data quality control. They also came up into doing risk to the climate analysis. IBM won that category. But there was a dozen categories in this selection, and IBM was in 3 of those categories, was the #1 winner. Okay. Envizi has 3 pillars, as we call them. 1, building data. It's a single system of record. It's auditable, financial grade sustainability data. Okay. And one of the big things here about that is they have thousands of connectors built in. The point of doing something like Envizi is you can capture data from about anything. Because that's the hard part with sustainability, is getting all the data in one place to be able to report on it, and not only get it the first time, that's almost easy. You know, it's keeping it coming every single month. In some cases, companies do it even more frequently. Maybe daily they're uploading data, but usually it's about once a month we're doing some kind of analysis. You've got to be able to get the data. So Envizi is nothing but lots of connectors. I mean, you can connect to so many different things. Streamlining the reporting and disclosure. Another thing that's really interesting on the Envizi side is they have built into it the international disclosure reporting requirements. So there's the greenhouse gas initiative reporting. Europe has a whole set of them. The United States has theirs, and you can build any disclosure report required that doesn't exist. You can build. One of the more interesting things Envizi allows us to do is I can actually take questions from multiple disclosure reports to create my own, like an internal report. Because maybe I'm going to I have something specific to Pakistan, or just something that my company wants to do. The board of directors says, we want you to report to us on certain things. You can build this disclosure reporting out. And if the questions and answers go across multiple disclosure reports, you can tie them all together. So you put it in one place and it appears on all your different reports. It's a really interesting tool. And then finally, the third pillar is the acceleration of decarbonization. It's all about insights and trends and things that are going red or green. You know, are we making progress? Are we not? Are we going backwards? Or suddenly we had a facility show poor performance in its electricity usage. Things like that are all built into it to help you do better. And it also has a whole piece to it of managing projects for sustainability itself. So you can have programs and projects that are around sustainability, and it helps you execute on those. And then based on the goals you set up for that program or project, you can see compare the actual results and see if it really did what you thought it was going to do. There are over 500 data types. You know, when you think about it, even if you look at that carbon footprint diagram I had on my original slide, you know, it's easy to say, oh, well, there must be about 20 things we have to track. There's actually over 500 already built into Envizi. There's so many different data types, whether that's, you know, utility billing data, as the diagram shows, electricity from various sources that can have various emissions. Where do you get things like gas? If you heat with gas, water, are you using water that's recycled water? If you get into anything like that, transport, refrigerants, big contributors. We all know of things like Freon and other gases out there that are more refrigerants. How do we get our electricity that we actually produced? Are you using solar? Maybe you have a wind turbine on a corporate campus. There's actually a few companies that have done that. Solar in the US and Europe is very common. Saudi Arabia is building huge solar farms. And meter data. So you can actually bring your smart meter data into Envizi. If you have things like offsets, waste and recycling, what kind of recycling efforts are you doing? Are you making improvements there? You can set in goals and benchmarks. What types of materials? You're building a new building. What types of materials were you using? Are you using things that are efficient for a building once it's built? Are we using materials in our supply chain from companies that maybe they're harvesting lumber somewhere, but they're also replanting that lumber. They're replanting the trees. You know, that's important. Our air travel, our building management systems, our Internet of Things data. Are we bringing sensor data in? Again, going more to the ESG side. What are we doing to be socially and environmentally responsible? You know, do we have people that are going out and working in our community doing things? Do we have volunteer groups, food banks? We're going to look at our company. How many people, how many rooms? There's a lot of different things around the company metrics that go into an ESG reporting. We track things around production, the buildings themselves. If I have a building out there that has a large footprint in terms of square meters, but I'm only using a third of it, you know, that's not a very efficient use of space and building. So that comes into a factor. And then there's weather data, and we'll talk a little more about weather data in a minute when I get to another slide. But at the end of the day, you're capturing everything you need around your ESG and sustainability reporting. Financial grade carbon accounting, very important differentiator for Envizi. The comprehensive reporting and disclosure on ESG. If the questions don't exist, if the disclosure template doesn't exist, you can create it yourself. There's virtually unlimited. And then tracking the performance to sustainability and commitments. So the system does greenhouse gas calculations. It has factors, multiple methods. It tracks performance against the commitments that your organization has made. And it's all out of one system of record. And I think that's a huge key, because companies that are doing this manually right now, a lot of them have spreadsheets all over the place from different systems, and they're trying to consolidate data. And the more a person has to consolidate data, the more likelihood you're going to have errors or misreporting. And then if you do that, it's hard to hold people accountable, if you don't have a good quality of data. And Envizi really helps do that. The solutions are modular. There are 9 modules within those 3 pillars. Okay, so emissions management, scope 1 and 2, also scope 3. And then setting targets and tracking your progress against those targets. On the ESG side, whatever reporting framework you need, whether that's an international standard. And those international standards, by the way, Envizi actually builds in the system and keeps them current. And if new standards or revised standards come along, they will provide the templates for that, so you don't even have to do it. If you're going to do anything around building ratings, if there's something like LEED, a BREEAM, here in the US, Energy Star is a big deal. And then value chain survey and assessments. That's always a fun one that's evolving. But how do you look back into the people supplying you and account for the carbon they're contributing, that you, in effect, they're doing it on your behalf, because you're requesting maybe service in a building. And if someone drives 50 kilometers in a delivery van or a maintenance van, how do you keep track of those sorts of things and account for them? But the bigger one's more around production and delivery of materials. And of course, decarbonization. We want to look at our utility bills. What's our real usage versus our target usages? We want to do interval analytics against our meters. And then, of course, sustainability program tracking. I touched on that already. You build programs. Programs have individual projects that have goals. So we got this program completed, and now we want to look at the results against the program and see if we actually are hitting our goals. It's graphics based. This is an example of just one screen. And I want to bring this out because it looks like, okay, this is kind of interesting. But a couple of things that are important here. One, you can see there's green, yellow, red. One thing that Envizi does is it looks at data that's in the system. So things that are green are captured data. It's actual data. Now, in Envizi, I can also say, because, there's often lag times between getting data, especially like utility bills and things that may take time to get, even if it's electronic, or if it's not electronic and somebody has to manually put it in, there's a lag time to get your real data in. So the system can be told, if there's no data, you can do 2 things. One, you can flag it red with no data. Or you can say, okay, based on it, there's a whole selection of rules that says, I want you to calculate what it probably could, or, like an estimate of what it is. So it'll create a temporary accrual to fill the hole in your data gap until you can go back, investigate it, or just get your data called up. That's really nice. And one of the data utilities in the system actually comes in, and you can literally say, give me every single location, or narrow it down by location or groups of locations, and tell me where I'm missing data. It's very powerful to remind you to make sure your data is accurate. You can also do reporting ranges. If you look up, you'll see I'm doing August 2021 to July 2022 here, but I can grab this bracket and move across, because it takes at least a year. You really have to look at it on an annual basis at a very minimal. Typically about 3 years is what most companies want to look at to get a 3-year trend. Do a year-to-year comparison across 3 years to see if you're really making progress. A couple other things, filter by all categories. You see that up there. If I were actually in Envizi and pulled that list down, there are at least a dozen different views under filter by category. View as energy. You see kilowatt hours. That can be BTUs. There are about 20 different things under this particular drop down. Usually it'll just totally change your views. You can also look over in the upper right hand corner where I see summary, track, benchmark, review. These are all different ways to change the view. There are literally hundreds. I could set it in Envizi and just click through different view variations. If I did one every 30 seconds, we could spend half the day just looking at the different data views available to do your analysis. Now, what's really nice about that, though, it's an overwhelming amount of views. You're not going to sit there and just spend your whole day flipping through views. But I can go through, flag the ones important to me as my views, and build my own custom view. I just log in and see all the things important to me at any time. All right. Yeah, here's a little bit deeper dive into how Envizi gets data and consolidates it. So I can get data from many different ways. Maybe it's an electronic feed. In some cases, an integrator says or you can do an integration to a company like a utility company that says, we're going to give you access to just go in and query your data, or maybe it's a way just going and picking up a bill, or maybe it's Excel. It could be a comma delimited file. Different people will give you different source files. So there's many different ways to go out and capture data. You can even just have somebody email an invoice. If you've got a format in something that is readable and can be parsed, it can be taken apart, then you can send it right to the system. It's a very, very powerful way to bring data in. I can also, of course, manually go in and put in data. Of course, one of our objectives is to try to minimize the manual data just for accuracy and effort. So we want to automate as much as possible, but I can do things manually. Once I have the data in, okay, I have my data consolidation. I have dynamic reporting tools, dashboards. Envizi uses Power BI. So you have what are called Power Reports in the system that are really versatile and flexible, and you can add your own. And of course, it's completely customizable ESG reporting, depending on your target. Are you reporting to the board? G is governance. It's the board of directors and senior executives often. What do we have to give them versus what are we required legally or by our government to do? What are we required maybe across our energy department may want its own certain types of reports. All of those things can be developed. And there's different frameworks that are supported. This is a very short list. There's only 5 here. There's actually a lot more than that. And they're being added all the time. Anytime any country puts in a framework or any kind of requirement, then Envizi tries to, within a quarter of that release, tries to be prepared to have that reporting available. And they do stay on top of it. Now, Envizi is this core. It's the central hub, really, of data from multiple sources from IBM. Maximo, for instance. Maximo can provide data on meters. It can provide project information, task information done for sustainability. You have something called Supply Chain Intelligence Suite. Supply Chain Intelligence is looking at that whole chain of people that are manufacturing and delivering products. And that way you can go in and look at their impact and bring it in. You have something called EIS, Environmental Intelligence Suite. Vegetation management actually should have a line under it. That's part of it. That's a second component of that. Environmental Intelligence Suite is interesting because it brings in things like data from weather. IBM owns the weather company, which is globally tracks literally weather data from everywhere. And you can feed that right into IBM Envizi, because one of the things you have to look at when you calculate your carbon are like heating and cooling days. What days were we what were the temperatures that were running that could explain why maybe our electricity went up because our HVAC units had to run more, something like that. And of course, finally, you have IBM Tririga. Now, IBM Tririga, I don't know if you talked about that today, but I know Mr. Shams works with Tririga a lot. And Tririga is a IWMS. It's an integrated workplace management system that literally tracks facilities from the time you're thinking about a location to you acquire it, you lease it, you you build it out, you plan how you're going to use your space. You go in and you can do operations and maintenance, although not at the level of a Maximo, and it also tracks sustainability data. And as an example, let's drill into what that kind of thing looks like a little bit. So if I have Tririga with Envizi, I can, as you look, you see green and you see blue. All right. So the green square boxes are Envizi, the blue is Tririga. Right. So Envizi allows me to consolidate my data. Then Tririga looks at terms, clauses, and SLAs. That's like with leases. Who is responsible for what? It works out the agreements and tracks agreements. And then Envizi comes back and says, well, based on all these agreements and all the things you're doing, here is my analysis of your efforts. You can also do things like identify opportunities to be more efficient and do that in Envizi. You can also do that in Tririga and share it with Envizi. You can perform condition assessments in Tririga. Again, I don't want to, I can spend 15 minutes just talking about this, but you see the idea that Envizi is the central core of data between an entire suite of IBM products. And you don't have to have any other product, by the way. You can just have Envizi. And you can feed data from the others if you have them or if you get them in the future. But you're not like going to have to go out and go to IBM and say, hey, I want all 5 of those different products in order to use Envizi. That's not the case. And it's not the case at all. Let's kind of finally talk about one actual example from Australia. All right. So GPT, this is a commercial real estate firm. One of the things that's interesting for GPT, and there's a firm in the US called Ryan Companies that's doing the same kind of thing, which is they want to brand themselves as a sustainable real estate firm. They want to be a sustainable developer. So in the case of GPT, they've been with Envizi over a decade, so they have lots and lots of data that they can go back on. What they have really done over a period of time, though, is they reduce their energy intensity. Okay, so intensity is how much energy you're using per square meter. All right, so they've reduced that 52%. So that's a huge, not only is it a huge impact on emissions, but it's also a huge savings across the cost, because if we're being far more, our intensity's gone way down, that means we're using a lot less energy, which of course is a lot less cost. So as they said, 20 million US dollars annually in savings on energy and water, just energy and water. Now we're just talking sustainability here. We're not even into the full ESG picture. These guys are focused on the sustainability. A big thing, accountability. We're tracking everything. We have a central repository of data. We know what's going on and who's supposed to do what. Are you doing it? Again, one of the big challenges around ESG reporting and sustainability in particular is getting all the data from all the different sources in a consistent manner. In this way, we're tracking it. We're automating as much as we can. We're saving a lot of time on our work sampling, our data gathering. So if something's missing, though, we know who should have delivered it. So we have that accountability. And it's just really important to be able to do that. All right, that is my very kind of quick spiel, my quick presentation on Envizi. What can I answer?
Thank you very much. Yeah, there are a couple of questions.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Hello, Tracy. How are you?
I'm quite well. How are you, sir?
Very fine. I have a couple of questions. Number one, is this reporting system calibrated with COP 26 reporting system? Envizi is going to give us a report for COP according to COP 26. The reporting structure.
On the reporting section, is it what now?
The reports that are going to generate, are they calibrated with COP 26 instructions? And can we use this data for carbon credits also?
Absolutely. You can absolutely track that data. So some of the reports in Envizi are simply columns and rows. Okay. You have a reporting mechanism for columns and rows. So you have the data there. Anytime you open anything in Envizi, you can send it as like a PDF, or you can send it to Excel. So you can generate any kind of report you want if it's not there. You also, of course, have Power BI reporting, which is a far more advanced way to do reporting and analytics. Again, Envizi leverages that themselves. You can also do your own, but it does track like carbon credits.
Okay, thank you. What is the mechanism for biodiversity tracking in this software? Do you have any particular thing regarding biodiversity marking?
Any specific markets?
Biodiversity, how are you going to track biodiversity tracking? How are you going to record that in that?
You know what? I actually do not have a good handle on exactly everything that's input on around biodiversity. I can get that information for you, but I honestly don't have a good answer for that question.
Okay,
I can reach in and get that from my friends at IBM and send to Mr. Shams to pass on.
Okay, Roger. Thank you. Have you purchased Beacon in Australia for this? I mean, you were talking about software which you acquire. Is it Beacon which we acquired?
No, this was Envizi. It
Okay,
was actually the company that IBM bought.
Okay, right.
So the product's called Envizi, but so is the company. It's the only thing they do is this product.
So for what? Okay, final question. For the ESG, what is the reporting format of how it is going to report to the board of governors, BOG? ESG data in what form? Can you give us some idea?
When you generate a report, you can do a couple of things with ESG. First off, the ESG reports you can just print off as a PDF file. It uses their exact formats they specify in a disclosure report, or if you build your own, it uses that format. You can also export that. So a lot of companies will save that, like export it into Word, so that they can put their own language, maybe put their on their letter, like a letterhead, a corporate letterhead. But the disclosure reporting formats are templates that are built in the system, but you can export those so that you can manipulate them yourself as well when you're done, to get final product.
Okay, fine. One last question. One of the major requirements is to disclosure. What can you give an idea about how disclosure is properly looked into this software? That does it ask for certain questions or certificates?
Yeah, I wish I had access to an Envizi environment. I'd show you real quick. I don't have one right now. I'm not actively involved in a client, but what it does with disclosure reporting is it has the template has all of the required questions, and there, of course, those are divided into sections or groups. And so you have a group of questions, you have the type, and you specify the type of answer required. Now, when you are doing this, filling these out, it's completely tracked. Every change is tracked. So there's a history tab where I can go in and look at everything everyone has done, who did it and when. And I can also assign individual questions to an owner. And then that owner could assign it to somebody to actually fill in the question, but they're still the owner, right? So I'm able to look at everybody responsible for this disclosure report, everything everyone has done to this disclosure report. And when it's finalized, it's final. Okay. But I have a complete history. I can attach documents. I can attach spreadsheet, whatever it is. I can attach everything to this disclosure report. But in the system, it has this incredibly detailed history of exactly what you've done.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tracy.
Tracy, we have distributed a feedback form also to all of the participants. So any questions that they related to Envizi, I will pass on to them, and you can give the feedback to those.
We can do that, and Mr. Shams, if in the future, if we need to do a deeper dive into Envizi itself, because that would be a couple of hours at a minimum, let me know in a little bit in advance. I'll make sure I have access to an environment as well. And we'll go in, if we could get permission, I can probably get permission from an actual customer to let me see real data, and I can do any kind of demo or anything you would like.
Thank you so much, boss. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, sir. अब बता दे मैं पूछ लेता हूँ. आज
इंटरनेशनल ब्रांड जैसे कि वॉलमार्ट, मार्क्स एंड स्पेंसर या कोई ट्रेडी, यूएनएफसीसीसी, यूएन, यूएससीपी आपके सॉफ्टवेयर को एंडोर्स करती है, रिकमेंड करती है कि आप ईएसजी की रिपोर्टिंग इस सॉफ्टवेयर से करें?
The question is, Tracy, that these big names that you just mentioned, like Care4, some other big names, do they endorse the reporting of Envizi?
Oh, it's
Or they comply with?
oh, so are there like endorsements from the agencies or anyone?
Yes, the big names.
Well, there's certainly a lot of references from the companies that use it. Now, in terms of like the organizations, I don't, they don't tend to endorse products is not a good word, but they a lot of times will make statements saying that they certify that the reports are meeting their requirements. I would have to reach out to IBM and ask them for that current list.
You know, what I'll do is ask this gentleman to write that question, because maybe I'm not using the right words. Maybe you can write that question on the feedback form that we have given, and then we'll pass it on to Tracy. So
that's
we'll
great
that
too. And I'll make sure any questions we have get answered, obviously with you.
Please. All right, please. Any more questions? So thank you, Tracy. Thank you very much. Khuda Hafiz.
No problem. Always great to work with you, and always fantastic to join my friends and colleagues in Pakistan. And next time you go to Karachi, send me a picture so I can, be jealous.
Sure. Thank you.
Salam.
Thank you very much. Wa alaikum assalam. Thank you. Khuda Hafiz. Done. अच्छा, बस फीडबैक फॉर्म्स को जरूर अपनी जो भी आपके जहन में कुछ एज सून एज पॉसिबल रहेगा, हॉट है वो इस वक्त क्वेश्चन था, तो आप जरूर फीडबैक फॉर्म्स को फिल कीजिएगा. फीडबैक फॉर्म का दूसरा भी एक पर्पस है कि इम्प्रूवमेंट फॉर अस, डू पॉइंट आउट कि हमारी क्या डेफिशिएंसीज वगैरह रहेंगी, और उसके फिर इंशाल्लाह इम्प्रूवमेंट वगैरह भी करेंगे नेक्स्ट सेशन में. तो थैंक यू वेरी मच. चाय इज बीइंग सर्व्ड एंड देन यू कैन लीव एंड आफ्टर थिंग. और बात करनी है समय. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.